There's a lot of text today. I don't want you to be intimidated by it. But I want us to, to be honest with you, I don't even remember if we've discussed this in a previous year, but this commentary of the Netziv is so important and speaks so fundamentally to the role of the Jewish people in the larger world that I just think that it's required reading. And if you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it in a while, it's certainly worth revisiting. I want us to remember the story of the spies for just a minute. We know that the spies came back with a negative report, and that the Jewish people, upon hearing the report of the spies, sort of threw up their hands in despair and said, it's hopeless, we're going to go, it's suicide to go into the land of Canaan and try to dispossess the indigenous peoples of their land. They're too powerful for us, we're never going to succeed, this is hopeless. And they really wanted to go back to Egypt at that point. And Hashem is so upset with this people, he turns to Moshe, that he says, let me destroy them, and I'll start all over with you, Moshe, and your descendants, and you will be the ones to inherit the land of Eretz Yisrael instead. And at this point, it is up to Moshe now to petition Hashem and to save the Jewish people, as he had done previously with the golden calf, if you remember. And as a matter of fact, Moshe, in the course of his prayer, actually invokes a semblance of what God had taught him when he was seeking forgiveness for the golden calf. And remember, what did God teach Moshe when Moshe was praying on behalf of the Jews after the golden calf? He taught him the 13 attributes of God's mercy. The 13 attributes of God's mercy, and we see that Moshe invokes them, at least in part, over here in PARSHA Shelach. But what does Moshe say? Moshe actually makes, if we're truly observant of the text, we'll note that Moshe actually is really making two different arguments, and let's take a look. Vayomer Moshe el Hashem, v'shama'u Mitzrayim ki ha'eleita b'chochacha et ha'am hazeh mikirbo. He says to God, God, if you destroy the Jews now, imagine the Chilul Hashem that is going to ensue. Egypt will hear about this. Ve'amru el yoshev ha'aretz hazot. Right? They're going to say to the indigenous people, and they're going to say, look at this people that God took out and led them with a cloud pillar and a fire pillar, and then you're going to kill everyone, Pasuk Tetvav, you're going to kill this entire nation all at once. All of the nations will say, verse 16, Mibilti Yecholat Hashem. God simply didn't have the wherewithal to bring this people to the land that he promised to them, and instead he slaughtered them in the desert. Ve'ata yigdal na koach Hashem kasher dibarta lemor. And now Hashem, let your strength be magnified in the eyes of the world. And then he invokes the semblance of the 13 attributes of mercy, Hashem, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed, etc. Okay? Now take a look at verse 20, and this is really important. Vayomer Hashem, salachti kidvarecha. Now God doesn't just say salachti. He says salachti kidvarecha. What does the word salachti means? I forgive. What does kidvarecha mean?
According to what you said.
According to what you said. Superfluous, no? Just say, okay, I forgive you. And then God says, V'ulam chai ani, however, I am alive. V'yimalei chavod Hashem et kol haaretz, and the glory of God will fill the entire land. What do those words even mean? And then God, after this, says that the spies will die, only Yehoshua and Kalev will get to go into the land, and the rest of the Jewish people who left Egypt will end up dying in the desert, and only their children will be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. So how is this a remedy, and how is this sort of like a conditional forgiveness? And yet God says, this is the remedy that needs to happen in order for me to forgive them properly. The generation that left Egypt has to die, and their children will go in instead. into the land. So we have to really unpack this. The Hamek Davar from the Netziv Tzvi Yehuda Berlin of the Volozhiner Yeshiva of the 19th century tells us something really quite important. He breaks it up over two psukim. And he says, Kidvarecha, when God says, I forgive according to what you said, hu miyutar, superfluous. What do you need that word for? V'darshu bibrachot aflamed bet she'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu atidim umot ha'olam lomar kein ashrei eved sherabo modeh lo. That what God was essentially alluding to Moshe is that the other nations are going to praise you for being able to make a successful argument that would move your master. V'yesh lahavin ma lo l'Moshe ladat im atidim umot ha'olam lomar kein olo. And the question, of course, is what difference does that make to Moshe? You should be proud of yourself, Moshe, that you lodged a successful argument to change Hashem's mind. Moshe is just looking for a reprieve for the Jewish people. He doesn't care why God will forgive. He's looking for forgiveness. Ela ha'inyan, but rather what it means is this. Deklapei shenatan shnei ta'amim. Moshe gave two arguments as to why God should forgive the Jewish people. Argument number one is V'shama'u Mitzrayim. It's a chilul Hashem. The other nations are going to hear about this and they're going to say that God is not as powerful as we thought he was. V'hu divrei Moshe atzmo. That was Moshe's own argument. But Sheinit ve'ata yigdalna v'gomer kasher dibarta v'gomer. Right? And then Moshe's second argument, which is, God, exercise your 13 attributes of mercy that you taught me. This is not my argument, the second argument, but it's the very words that you, God, taught me to use when I'm seeking forgiveness for the Jewish people. Veheshiv hakadosh baruch hu salachti aval kidvarecha lo mitam hamidot shehein hema dvarai ela mitam dvarecha sha'atidim umot ha'olam v'chulei. He says, and God says, I'll forgive you, but only for argument number one that you made up. Not for argument number two of the 13 attributes of mercy that I taught you. V'nafkaminas mizeh she'ena slicha ela mitzad chilul Hashem sheyomru umot ha'olam mibilti yecholet v'gomer. And the point of this is that God says, I want you to know the reason why I'm forgiving you. The reason why I'm forgiving you is because of the chilul Hashem. That you correctly pointed out that the other nations will not learn properly from this lesson. If the whole objective of my giving the Torah to the Jewish people is to amplify my name throughout the world via the Jewish people, then by destroying them will accomplish the exact opposite. And since I need to sanctify my name throughout the world, I cannot destroy the Jews. I accept that argument. I do not accept the argument that you gave as far as putting forth the 13 attributes of mercy, because those merciful attributes are worn out at this point. And therefore, the only way that I can forgive them is if through my forgiveness we alleviate the chilul Hashem. If an equal chilul Hashem is made by my forgiving them, then there's no point in forgiving them. I can only forgive them if, through my forgiveness, we alleviate the chilul Hashem, the desecration to God. And now let's explain what that means. So what does this mean? We don't have time to go through the entire text, but the next verse explains what God meant when he said, Salachti kidvarecha. God says, Ve'ulam chai ani. So the Netziv tells us, you know what the words chai ani means? He says, chai means I am coming to my fulfillment, my purpose in manifesting myself to the world is when God is alive. When God says I'm alive, it means the world recognizes me. I'm fulfilling my purpose in manifesting myself. And ani means b'chashivuti, when the world recognizes who I am. That's what chai ani means, that ani, God says, is when the world recognizes the ani of God, so then I am chai, then I am alive. I'm a living God in the eyes of the world. And that ultimately, says Hashem, is my objective. I want the world to recognize Hashem. That's what chai ani really implies. I want the world to recognize God. And then he says that if you really want to understand why God forgave the Jewish people, you take a look at the pasuk in Tehillim, which David HaMelech said, and it goes down to where the underlined section is. V'amar, va'yisa yado lahem lahapilotam bamidbar, that God decided that he wanted to knock them out or wipe them out in the desert. Ulahapil zar'am bagoyim ulazarotam ba'aratzot. And what he did instead was to scatter them among the other nations of the world. And essentially what the Netziv says is that, really, why do I want to bring you into Eretz Yisrael, you the Jewish people? I want the world to look at the country of Medinat Yisrael, and I want them to see a magnificent nation living in a magnificent land, living a miraculous existence, and to be able to be inspired by that and to see the hand of God in the universe. But unfortunately, when you rejected Eretz Yisrael, you were essentially saying that it was a vote of no confidence in the miraculous existence of the Jewish people. Your decision to even send spies in the first place was that you were saying that this is too foreign for you. You can't conceive of the idea of living as a miraculous people, and you would rather enter the land of Israel al pi derech hateva, using non-miraculous means to infiltrate the land of Israel and to be immigrants like any other nation of immigrants who come into a land and settle in that land. God says, if you're simply going to live in Eretz Yisrael with a mundane existence that's non-miraculous, the world will not be able to learn sufficiently from you by you remaining localized in Eretz Yisrael. How in the world will the Gentile nations in Africa and Asia and Europe and the Western Hemisphere, how will they learn about you if there's nothing miraculous about your existence? If all you're doing is just living life and being productive and having industry and being high-tech and developing and living an ethical life and having an ethical society according to the Torah, that's wonderful. But how will you be spreading the message of Hashem throughout the world? That's not possible. You will not be generating enough positive press about God if you're living that kind of mundane existence in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, through your sin, you have demonstrated that you are not prepared to live a miraculous existence in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, the only way that I can spread the message of God that you, the Jewish people, have received at Har Sinai, is to scatter you among the nations. And by scattering you among the nations, eventually meaning that the temple will be destroyed as a result of the sin of the spies, you will have to go into Galut after a certain amount of time in Eretz Yisrael. It is necessary because that is the only way that I can get out the message of God to the rest of the world, is by placing the Jews among the Gentile nations. And that essentially is what Chazal say, that God spread us out throughout the world in the diaspora so that we could be a light unto the nations, like the prophet Isaiah says, and also that we could create people who would become themselves believers in Hashem, monotheists, ethical monotheists. That's why Hashem spread us out into the world. We created Christianity. We created Islam, like the Rambam says. We've created a monotheism in the world, and that's why God placed us in the exile. But it was a direct result of our rejection of living a miraculous life in Eretz Yisrael. Because God says, if you're not living miraculous lives, there's no way the world would find out about you. And that leads him to the following conclusion in this last paragraph. He says, Uvali avon hamiraglim Lo higia kach. V'im kein heichaya magia zeh hatachlit. The last paragraph, he says, if we had not sinned with the spies, we would have been able to spread godliness throughout the world without having to live among the other nations. How's that possible? How could the world possibly learn about Hashem if we, the people of his book, did not disseminate that message throughout the world? How would they have learned it? What would have been the alternate reality if we had not sinned with the spies and we had instead all remained in Eretz Yisrael? He says as follows, Aval be'emet im lo sirvu mitchila